In this session, we're going to create our first composite action. An action can be placed in a separate repository, and then it can be used in any project, in any workflow. Alternatively, you can place it in the current repository, but in that case, it will only be available for the current project, and I can only use it in my current workflows. In this lesson, we will specifically create a local action for the current repository. The principle is very simple. In the GitHub folder, we need to create a separate folder called Actions. So I choose the GitHub folder and create the Actions folder. Next, for each action, if we have 2, 3, or 4, for now we only have 1, we need to assign a name. I'm going to create an action to move these steps, the cache into it. So, I don't want to write a lot of lines here, like 10. I want to write just a couple of lines. That's why I'm going to move these steps into the action. So, my action will be called Cache Node Modules. I'm naming the folder for the action Cache Node Modules, like this, and I'm creating this folder. Now, everything I write in this folder will relate to this action. And the most important thing that needs to be there is that there must be a file called actions.yaml. It doesn't matter what category this action belongs to. It can be a composite action, which we're going to write now, or it can be a JavaScript or Docker action. In any case, there will be a file called action.yaml. And now, in this action.yaml file, we will write the main instructions. The action must definitely have a name, so we write the keyword name and specify the name for this action. Next, it also needs to have an extremely detailed and comprehensive description, so I'm going to provide it with an additional description. If this is a local action and you're only going to use it for the project, you can write something random. But if you plan to eventually place this action in a repository, then the description and title need to be very informative, because that's what shows up right here. So, this is the description, this is the title. The more informative your title description is, the more likely it is that your action will be found and used. Next, pay attention that this is an action, not a workflow. And in an action, we won't have an event, meaning there's no trigger for when to run it. We're just going to call it, so there won't be a trigger here like there was in the workflow. Here, we will have the trigger runs right away. So, it's the instruction for running. Besides specifying what we want to run in this action, we must first indicate the type, so I write using and specify composite. Because my current action will be a composite action, and the GitHub action needs to know about it. These two lines must be present for it to understand that this is a composite action. And then I just use the steps that I need. As I mentioned, a composite action consists of a combination of different steps, and I need to combine these steps, meaning I would like to not have this here, but to have it present in the action. So I can copy this from here and paste it right here. The only thing, of course, is that you see it highlights right away. You need to keep an eye on these indents to make sure they're everywhere and follow the rules. Like this, now everything has disappeared. Notice that the editor immediately highlights that it's missing shell. When we work with actions, each step it performs asks me to specify the shell. Before this, we were running everything under bash. Bash was the default, but here we need to specify it. We write down the shell. In this way, for each step, you need to specify the shell that we're working with. So, if there's a run command, you need to specify that it's bash. In the step where we use a third-party action, we don't have a run, so it doesn't ask me for anything. That's it, it's that simple. We created our local action, which we can now use to call this action. We simply use the uses string here, removing everything else. We can also leave a name for the step. So let's say use custom action. You can just use uses without a name and specify the path. If this were an action in a separate repository, we would have something similar with our login and the action ID. But since it's local and in the same directory, we need to set the path to the repository, which means the path to the root of the repository. So we start the path from here, .github Actions, and then this cache node modules part. We won't specify the YAML file because it already knows to use action.yaml, as the condition is that the file must be named action.yaml. This way, we've simplified the current workflow, and now we just need to run it. Let's find it in the Actions tab of the repository and enable it. Since it was turned off, just a reminder, it will cache the installation of node modules and also install them, so let's go ahead and run it. Testing custom action. We're committing and pushing. As you can see, the workflow is just a call to the action, but everything should work, just like in the previous lesson, like in the 14th workflow. To run our action with Docker, we need to go to the 14th workflow and start it manually, since we have workflow dispatch set up. And now let's wait. During the execution, a different workflow was started, not the one from the current lesson, which I didn't keep track of and just didn't turn off. The job is complete. It uses a custom action, runs it, and cleans up. It runs commands perfectly. Let's see how to set parameters with the with key, similar to other actions. After performing a custom action, it erases what it needs, and we see that it's running the commands perfectly, creating the file, installing, meaning it's executing all the necessary commands that needed to be done according to the conditions. Let's move on and look at how we can set parameters so that we can pass some parameters here using the with key, just like we usually do with other actions. Let's say I want to set an additional parameter to enable or disable caching. So I can create a parameter called caching and pass either true or false. Let's say I pass false. For instance, I don't want it to be cached based on my conditions. This means that under certain circumstances, we should consider modifying the action file accordingly. Let's edit the action file then. By doing so, we ensure that we need to use the inputs parameter to get the correct value retrieved here. I'm setting this parameter after the description, writing the keyword inputs, and then I pass the variables that I want to receive. As I mentioned, my first variable is caching, so I'm using this key as the name for the variable. And the variable, first of all, the required parameter is specified. It should be either mandatory or optional. If I specify true, that means this variable is required, so I won't be able to make such a call here because it will require me to set the variable. And if I specify false, that means this variable is optional, so I can pass this parameter or I can choose not to pass it. This is important. Next is the description. And this is the default value because if I disable it, meaning it's not mandatory to pass the parameter, but I want to use this variable here in the logic, so the default value must definitely be set. I'll set the default parameter to true, so by default, my logic is that it will always cache, but if I want to disable the cache, I can do it this way by passing the parameter caching false to turn off the cache. The only thing is that it needs to be passed as a string, and also in the workflow itself, it should be a string. Otherwise there will be an error. So we added the parameter, let's test it. After that we added our parameter, and now let's add the logic. We're interested in this step that handles the cache, and if I want to disable it when the cache is false, I'll just add an if statement. I'll access the inputs context, because I want to get the value of this cache. So, by accessing the inputs context and the caching variable, I'll have either the default value true or whatever I pass. And I'll check against true. So we compare it to the value true. If it's true, then those steps will be executed. If it's false, then the whole expression will return false. And this step will simply be skipped. Let's commit and push. Let's check the repository. Go to the 14th workflow and run this workflow. We'll wait for it to finish. The workflow has completed successfully. And as we can see, the array is empty, so no cache was created. The last thing we'll look at in this lesson, besides the fact that an action can take inputs, is that it can also return values. So we can also set the output path, and it works in the same way. We're coming up with a name for our variable. Let's say we have some status. Next, this status must have a value that we will return. For example, there will be a status called active that we return, and of course the description. This is how it works. And the current workflow will return the outputs context, and there we will have this key status through which we will get this value. Basically, I'm wrapping up this lesson. See you in the next session.